Scott Frost took the podium to update us all on UCF football right before the start of fall camp. But what did the ball coach have to say about his team?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of every day. Turn us up, turn us on. We'll turn it out. I'm here with my good friend, Andrew GlucHoV, purveyor of all things UCF sports. We're here, Andrew, to talk today about Scott Frost's pre-fall camp press conference. He gives us a QB update, talks a little bit about the readiness of the team. And then, of course, the question everybody wants to know, what is UCF's offensive identity under Scott Frost 2.0 back in Orlando? Let's start at the top. He took the podium. He was asked a question about QBs. This is what Scott Frost had to say.
Compared to the spring, how do you evaluate the quarterbacks differently to make that decision, to get to that final answer? Who's going to go out there against Jacksonville State?
Yeah, I told the three quarterbacks we're kind of going to start with a blank slate now. You know, spring was great. I don't think anybody really emerged. But through spring, they were learning. The whole team was learning. They would make a mistake because we hadn't coached it well enough. Somebody around them would make a mistake that would make their job harder. Now that everybody's familiar with what we're going to do, now's the right time to really evaluate it. And I think it's the most fair time to really evaluate it. So we're kind of starting with a blank slate. And like I said, we're going to give everybody a chance, not anoint anybody. Somebody's going to have to step up and take it, and we're going to give them opportunities to compete.
Now that everybody's familiar with what we're trying to do, it's the most fair time to evaluate it, and they're starting with a blank slate. That's what Scott Frost had to say about where the QB race stands going into fall camp. You're going to have to narrow it down pretty quickly here, Andrew. In my opinion, you've got to get the reps to the guy who's going to be your week one starter. So they can't waste too much time on this three-man carousel thing. He's got to find a QB, and he's got to narrow it down quickly in these first couple practices.
Yeah, one of the things that people are going to have to either learn or relearn about Scott Frost is how he talks during press conferences, where he'll talk and he'll say stuff, but you got to have to read in between the lines. And this one was kind of a shot across the bow of the quarterbacks. You know, basically you start with a blank slate. It's because there was a lot of problems in the spring of inconsistencies, just, you know, learning this new system, and no one's really, you know, stepping up overall to be able to start to stake a claim in this job. So it's like, you know what, let's just wipe it clean, start over. You've had the summer to work on your conditioning, to be able to handle this tempo, study the playbook, no more excuses. It's time to put up or shut up. And as you said, you know, they need to sooner or before or later narrow down on the quarterbacks and have someone coming out there. Because remember, UCF doesn't open against an FCS cupcake. They play against Jacksonville State, an FBS school. And while that team did get gutted pretty hard when they lost Rich Rod as a head coach, it's still an FBS school. And you know, they can, you know, surprise UCF if they're not ready. So I totally agree with you. You got to get someone at least, you know, getting that cream to the top and get them the first team reps and really start to narrow this down. We're at the 1 month mark until game one. So time is running out on being able to finish, you know, getting your 2D set up and really installing that offense.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of these, not all these guys have the same strengths and weaknesses. And so if you want to, we'll talk about offensive identity later, but if you want to kind of figure out what your offensive identity is, you got to figure out who your quarterback is, and you got to do that because I'm telling you, week one is quickly approaching. It feels like every time I look at a calendar, I can't believe that this offseason has flown by and we're almost at the start of the college football season. Now, you mentioned that week one matchup. You have some time to get it together. What are the chances, do you think, maybe that Scott Frost goes into that game one with not a lot of pressure for naming a definitive starter. I mean, does he potentially have a game or two here to work that out?
Well, I mean, are you really willing to risk, punting on the season opener? There's a lot of pressure on Scott Frost. They're already hamming it up. First Frost. It's the same thing they did in 2016 when he had his first game as a head coach there, where they really made that first game into an event. This is 2.0. It's happening again. So there's pressure to deliver. The real question is, can they rely enough on the other aspects of the offense so that they don't have a settlement on a quarterback, that they can kind of, shuffle things around week 2, game 2, you can get away with that against North Carolina A&T, which is, an FCS school that has struggled in recent years, not many wins to go around. But this first game, you've got to be really careful. This game can get away from you real quick if you don't have that system locked down. And he even said each quarterback brings different things to the table. We've talked about this, and that's actually part of the problem. Is if you had two guys that were similar, you can at least have a similar playbook, and then the difference between one and the other is not that big. These are three very different players, and the playbook that can be executed differs heavily between each player. And I think that's where the real problem is, because your offensive linemen and your running backs and your wide receivers, they have to deal with whichever style offense is being run, and that they have to change with that. So, right now it's about coming together. It's about gelling. It's about finding continuity. And if you got three quarterbacks that are all really different, it's hard to gel.
I agree. Look, let's get to a quick sponsor break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about benchmarks that your team is ready to play football. We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCF. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money, guys. Monarch Money is kind of like your personal CFO to help you get your finances in order. So whether you're managing your finances with a partner or just on your own, building wealth is easier when you do it with Monarch Money. Monarch Money has a great app that you can use that helps you get your finances in order. And do budgeting. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing money, as I mentioned, you're building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Sign up today. Andrew, Scott Frost was asked a question about benchmarks that your team hits during fall camp and in the spring that let you know that you are going to be ready to play football. So listen to what he had to say.
Steps up and takes it.
Coach, what are some benchmarks that you yourself are looking forward to seeing that are going to be signs that this team's going to be ready?
I think if we can get through practice and limit mistakes, around college football, you're just watching it from afar. My opinion is when you have a collection of new people that haven't worked together for 3 years, mistakes can happen and teams beat themselves. If we can develop into a mature team that's disciplined and doesn't do the little things that beat ourselves, then we're going to be tough to beat. But that's hard to really nail down in on. Because there's a million things that happen that you've talked about, but there's also a lot of things that happen through the course of a competition that you haven't had time to talk to the team about. So it really comes down to maturity and discipline. If we can get through practices, not doing the little things that get you beat and continue to operate well, like I said, I think our talent will shine through at that point.
Attention to detail, not doing the little things that get you beat. He's pointing at, and he feels like when his team is not doing those things, that is a significant benchmark for him in year one. Look, I think Scott Frost has a belief in this team in year one and I like it. It feels like he's not leaning on, oh, well, we're rebuilding, and he's trying to play good football out of the gate here. And he's preparing this team as if they're going to be able to win now. And I like that attitude.
Oh, I think it's a great attitude. No one wants to go through a rebuild. I mean, that's profanity in sports. Rebuild or retool. Here's truth. He said a lot of obvious statements. In today's age, having a large turnover of players is not uncommon, but even more so when you have a new coach comes in. He talks about players, 3 years of continuity. Well, you got most of your team doesn't have 3 months of continuity as far as being on the field, yet alone 3 years. So the benchmarks you're looking at are very simple benchmarks. It's, have the cardio to be able to manage the tempo, have the focus to be able to manage the tempo, and have the physical quickness to be able to manage the tempo. That's what basically this team all comes down to, managing the tempo. He talks about mistakes. The most common mistake in a tempo offense is a false start on the offense, because they're not set. The cadence goes off, and again, that comes back to a lack of focus, which usually comes from being a little tired. When you get a little winded, your focus gets a little bit off, and you may listen to the defenders bark some calls and get suckered in, which we've seen before. So it all comes back to being able to manage the tempo. And if you can do the little things, as you said, the little things, those attention to detail pieces, if you can get that locked in, the rest will kind of fall into place. There's talent there. There's a reason why he's confident. There's plenty of talent there, but you have to gel it together. Your offensive line, you're as strong as your weakest link, and you got to get those guys gel together. I think more so than any position group, that's the one that has to be the most in sync. And as a guy who played offensive line for a number of years, until I stopped growing and everyone just kept growing. I loved playing, and I was even undersized when I was still playing, and I loved it because of the camaraderie that came with it, and it was a kind of a chess game. When you're in the trenches, because they're trying to outsmart you on where they're going to hit. You have gap assignments, and then you have to kind of guesstimate based on how they're looking. You look at their hips, you look at their eyes, where they are their feet turned a little bit, are they telegraphing, stuff like that, and that takes mental fortitude. But if you don't have the conditioning, you're going to lose a step on that, and you're going to be too busy sucking wind and trying to get that instead of doing what you're supposed to do to see how are they going to come to your to the outside, are they going to stunt in. There's so many different ways that a defense can attack you, and if you're tired, you're going to make a mistake. So it comes back to get your stamina up, handle that, and the rest will start to fall into place.
Yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, I have questions about how disciplined this team is going to look in year one. And that tells you a lot about how those processes and those philosophies, those coaching principles are taking hold in your team. Is UCF going to be a team that commits dumb penalties, dumb false starts, undisciplined, unsportsmanlike conducts? How disciplined a football team are we going to see in year one under Scott Frost? From everything that I've heard, and we've got a few sources on the inside here that are telling us that process is taking hold fairly well.
And here's the thing, these are a lot of these transfers. They're not young kids. They're guys who've been in college football for a little while. So they've been able to embrace it. It is, in my opinion, kind of easy. It's getting the young guys, the freshmen, they're the ones who have to really step up from here, high school level, to here, college level. And that's where the value of some of these, seniors come into play. Like the four that went to pro day, and Rubelt, Kelly, Lawson, and Montgomery. Those are the guys you're relying on to help those younger players elevate, their expectation and tolerance for basically mental and physical punishment, because you practice. You perform at 80% of how you practice. So you really got to step up on the practice level. And if you want to be good at game time, and when your cardio is being hit hard, that's when those leaders really got to help pull you up, get your spirits going, help you break through that mental barrier, because the mind goes before the body does usually, short of, like tearing an ACL or something. So the older players play such a valuable role in helping these younger guys embrace that culture.
Yeah, they do. Look, all of it's got to culminate in some sort of offensive identity. What is that offensive identity going to be? We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCF. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Look, we've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot to a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling to try to find the best deal? A Game Time's Zone Deals. Pick the best seats in your section. You get panoramic seat views. It's pretty awesome, guys. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets or game tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? Game Time. Andrew, UCF needs an offensive identity. Scott Frost was asked a question about that offensive identity. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Coach, at Big 12 Media Day, some of your players described your offense as fast. What do you want the identity of this offense to be?
Well, UCF Fast is still up all over the building, too. I really appreciate everybody for leaving some of those things out, because I didn't have to reinvent a lot of things. Fast can mean a lot of different things, and we talk about it in our team meetings. But first, I want to execute at a fast pace and within plays. Less than full speed doesn't get it done. There's too many talented guys out there. So we want to be able to attack. I think we got the type of athletes here that fit me and fit our offense well. And if we can max those guys out, then we'll look like a fast offense. But we're also going to play complementary football, and I don't exactly know what we have yet. If our defense is as good as I think it could be, we might be a little more careful on offense. If we need to go score a bunch of points to win, then we're going to do our best to do that. But I think through camp and the first couple contests, we'll really figure out the best formula to try to get wins at the end of the day.
UCF Fast is what we can expect. What do you think about UCF Fast, man? He said, look, man, I appreciate you guys for not taking this down, because, that's who we're going to be. Faster the better for UCF in 2025.
It's funny. You compare the 2017 offense under Scott Frost and the 2018 offense under Josh Heupel. And the Heupel squad was actually faster. They were, they played with more tempo, but it's a double-edged sword. And Frost kind of alluded to it about the defense, because if you go too fast, you don't give your defense enough time to rest and recuperate. And you need that when you start getting into the meat of the schedule, where you need your defense to get enough break time and be able to handle other strong offenses. I mean, Big 12 is known for strong offenses where defenses go to die. So, as you said, it's going to be a little dynamic in the fact of, depends on what our defense is giving us. If they need us to slow down, we're going to slow down. If they need if they're in a good spot, we need to put some points on board. We're going to push the ball and put points on the board. That's real coaching. That's smart stuff right there. That's what we kind of missed with the second half of the Malzahn tenure. The first half, you actually saw this a little bit more, 2021 and 22. But in 23, 24, not so much. In the second half of his tenure, they just kind of went through the same motion, no matter what the situation was, always same motion. But earlier on, you'd have times where they would be pushing the ball a little bit more, and then they would pull back, and it really depended on the situation. I think Scott Frost, through his experience, recognizes, you look at what happened in 2017, where they had to move schedules around because of hurricanes. And as a result, had to play, I think it was off the top of my head, 10 games in a row. I may be slightly off on that, just spitballing on it, but it was like 10 weeks in a row because they played one less game than everybody else because of the way they had to lose a game on the schedule. But the thing was, as the season wore on, the defense started giving up more and more points and started looking like they were just worn down. And they were. I mean, you're giving up over 30 points to Austin P from the FCS level. And then by the time you play against Memphis in the conference championship game, a team who you thumped earlier, you're giving up over 55 points, or 52 points going into second overtime to try to put it away. I mean, it's difficult. Luckily, UCF's schedule right now is favorable in the fact that it breaks up the buys, but fingers crossed that Mother Nature doesn't have other plans. But the offense has to be dynamic enough to know, okay, situation requires we need to give the defense a little more time, pull back a little bit, slow it down. But again, that's where the coaching staff makes their money. They're going to make that decision, not just on a per game basis, but situational basis.
Yeah, look, a lot of criticism of up-tempo offenses is that, sometimes even when they score quickly, they leave their defense hanging out to dry right back on the field. Can you slow the pace of the game situationally? On our next segment, we'll talk about that run game and what he had to say about the run game. But look, man, you've got big shoes to fill in replacing RJ Harvey, and being able to play fast, but also control the game on the ground is going to be so important. And they've got to take steps towards becoming that football team. I don't expect it to be a finished product in year one, Andrew, but certainly it's going to be fun to watch what that year one product is, because UCF had more talent than the 4 wins they turned in last season. You probably had the
by far.
Yeah, you had arguably the second best back in college football in RJ Harvey. Only Ashton Genty and my book was better. And I think if you had given him the 150 extra carries Ashton Genty got, he breaks 2,000 yards rushing at 6.8 yards per carry. So, fascinating conversation. Always fun when the head coach takes the podium, and it lets me know that we are closer to football. But hey, look, we're going to get out of here. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me today. And we'll be back at you guys tomorrow to discuss more of this press conference and what Scott Frost had to say. That's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of every day. For your next listen, go check out our friends at The Portal Show. Our guy Brian Smith has the latest in portal signings and rumors. He knows everything that's going on in college football, and you can too by listening to The Portal Show. You can find them on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Find us here next time on Locked On UCF.